Hello there. I wanted to spend some time going through and providing you with some narration to the section of the PowerPoint on vocabulary that we haven't covered in class. This is supplemental, and as I always say, I'm not a professional video production person, and I'm certainly not an actress. So forgive the, what should I say, novice nature of the video recording. But I do want us to talk a little bit about vocabulary and why vocabulary is such an important component of reading instruction. And there have actually been some studies that show that if teachers fail to address one of the five pillars of reading, vocabulary often is the one that's not addressed or the one that gets the least dedicated time and attention. And if you think about the fact that when we read, access to vocabulary is critical for our comprehension and understanding, and also that reading is one of the key ways that we improve vocabulary, then this topic certainly merits some of our attention. So the first thing I would ask you to do is read along this list of words with me. Are, between, consists, continuously, corresponding, curve, draws, variation, graph, if, isolated, known, making, only, often, with, one, points, relation, set, table, values, variables. So one of the things I would ask you all to think about for a minute is, which of these words, if any, are not familiar to you? And if you say, I understand those words, and if we were interacting, I would ask you, do you need a definition for any of these words? And most of you would say, no, I understand. And then if I showed you this text and we read it together, if the known relation between the variables consists of a table of corresponding values, the graph consists only of the corresponding set of isolated points. If the variables are known to vary continuously, one often draws a curve to show this variation. And then I were to ask you some questions about what that means, many of you would go, I'm not really sure. And the reason is not that you did not understand this isolated set of words, but you didn't have the background knowledge or the context, perhaps, for interpreting those words in this particular passage. And so one of the things I always want you to remember is that it's more than just about knowing the words, but it's also about knowing the words in that context and with the unique meaning that they have based on whatever that material is about. So, it's important to remember that when students don't understand an author's vocabulary, they don't understand the text. And good vocabulary instruction is going to emphasize useful words, words that they see frequently, important words, which are sometimes those large key words that we talked about the other day that carry a lot of the meaning in a passage, particularly when we're talking about expository text. And then sometimes some difficult words, idiomatic words, words that have more than one meaning. So think about the difference between the term table when we introduce it out of context and the term table in the paragraph that I was just reading, right? It's very different from a mathematical perspective than in the way that a student would use that word in everyday speech. Okay? So a couple of things that I want you to think about. Isabel Beck and her colleagues are some of the preeminent scholars in vocabulary instruction. It's really, those are often the sources that I go to first for questions about vocabulary. And some of this information is summarized from them. But I think it's important to think about the fact that high knowledge third graders, so high performing third graders, their vocabulary is equal to low performing 12th graders. So just think about that range in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with knowledge development, which remember is one of the things that ILA has suggested should be another pillar of reading instruction, knowledge development. And so if you're thinking about developing knowledge and vocabulary being key to accessing that information, then that's a critical point. Linguistically poor first graders have about 5,000 words in their vocabularies. Linguistically rich first graders have about 20,000, right? 4 increase the number of words. And once those gaps are established, they're hard to close up unless we're really hitting vocabulary hard in schools. And we certainly have some information to indicate that perhaps we are not. So if you think about it, knowing a word is not all or nothing, right? I may have I've never heard that word before, or I may have some contextualized knowledge. So often I'll say to you all in class, "What do you know? Have you heard of? Do you know?" And you'll nod your head, and then I'll ask you for more information. It's like, well, I kind of have heard of it in context, but I'm not really sure. Versus I really know and understand that word. I can use it in a variety of ways. I can come up with synonyms for that word. I can come up with antonyms for that word. I can explain it in lots of different ways. And so it's not only that people with large vocabularies know more words, but they know more about the words that they know. Okay? So one of the things that's key for us as educators is to think about which specific words are most important to teach. How do I define and contextualize those words? And how do I define them in ways that students are likely to understand? Because, often the dictionary, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but it doesn't really give an accessible definition to students. And then, how do I engage students with those words so that they process them actively, and they engage with them, and they have fun with them, and they adopt them and are exposed to them enough that they become part of their own working vocabularies, which is what we want, right? So yes, we want to show students how to use a dictionary, but we also want to use what I would say is a student-friendly dictionary. We'll get to that a little later on. So yes, what does the dictionary provide, but also how do you interpret that information? We need to encourage them to do some deep levels of processing, integrating those words, multiple exposures, and again, a small number of important words that are ideally related so that they can really understand and develop, conceptual knowledge. And so one of the things that I can remember taking Spanish as a foreign language as a high school student, and every Monday we would get 20 to 25 or sometimes even 30 new vocabulary words. That's a lot. And yes, I was a pretty good rote memorizer, so I could kind of memorize those words, line them up on a test, do some matching or whatever. But I didn't really know those words. I couldn't use them effectively in context, and I certainly might not understand them if a native speaker of Spanish were to use them in conversation with me. So we want to make sure that we're selecting words carefully, and then we're teaching them with a level of depth that really make them accessible to students. One reason that Beck and colleagues say that often vocabulary instruction isn't effective is because we treat all words like they're the same and have an equal level of importance. Very common for it to be, here's the word, here's the definition, now use it in a sentence. And then that we don't make it very interesting. So, quarrel, an argument or disagreement. That's very typical dictionary definition. The teachers told the boys to stop quarreling. Well, that's okay. It tells us kind of what quarrel means, but we could probably give an example that was much more meaningful to a student, and then we could get them to practice with that word. And quarrel might be a word that students would be engaged in and interested in understanding, right? But this definition is actually really